if psychology and pop culture had a baby, they'd call it Shrink Tank.
There is a sort of pendulum that's swinging back and forth where we kind of go from one extreme.
And I think there's an element of truth to
because
this.
I have something interesting later in the show that will make you feel very weird.
From Nashville and Charlotte, this is the Shrink Tank Podcast. And welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. We have a great show for you. Our trending topic today is the college admissions scandal, the psychology of privilege. But first, let's meet our Charlotte panel. Dr. Emma Kate Wright is in Charlotte. Emma Kate, tell me, were you, when you went to college, did your family pull a lot of strings to get you in?
No, I was lucky in the sense that I got offered a scholarship to go to one school, but I decided I didn't like that school as much as College Charleston. So not many places are as pretty as Charleston, South Carolina. So I got to go to Charleston, and it was because of my grades, that sort of thing.
Oh, because you earned it.
Well, yeah. I got in. I worked hard, and I don't think, no special favors were called in. So.
Dr. Frank Gaskell's not with us today, and it is not a coincidence that he's out on the day that we talk about privilege.
Yeah.
So we'll just pass over that point right there. He's conveniently absent.
Yeah.
But Jonathan Hedderly's here. Jonathan's our certified Asian who rounds out the panel. And Jonathan, tell us about your college admissions experience.
Well, I applied to 2 colleges, and I got waitlisted on one, immediately got accepted to the other, accepted that acceptance. It freaked out a lot of people that I only applied to 2 colleges. I never even visited either of those colleges. When I went to freshman orientation the week before classes started, that was the first time I ever set foot at college. And I actually had somebody pull strings for me. My youth pastor at the time was so freaked out before I'd gotten acceptance, like, this is reckless, that he had pulled strings and got me admitted to his alma mater, which was a small Bible college in Oregon. At the time, I don't think it was accredited. But all of a sudden, I get an acceptance letter from this college and requesting information for scholarship and financial aid. And I'm like, I didn't apply here. What's going on?
That's weird.
So there you go.
I like that he pulled strings to get you into a non-accredited Bible college.
Yeah, I don't even know I think you just have to pull a string. I think it's a very literal, that's where the term came from.
It's just like a sign-up list. They're like, welcome to college.
Yeah.
We'll take your money.
Yeah, exactly. Well, neither of my parents went to college, so this college admissions scandal that we'll talk about in the second segment is so foreign to me because they had no idea about college. The extent of my parents' involvement in helping me with college was one time I was in the car with my dad, and he said, out of the blue, well, why don't you go to Virginia Tech and study engineering? And I said, because I would hate engineering. And he said, okay. That was it. That was that was the extent of my college involvement of my parents. So yeah, not a lot of strings pulled on behalf of my family or anyone really for college for me.
It's a great pep talk for sure.
Yeah, good pep talk. Good talk there, Dad. Well, each week, Jonathan trolls around the internet and he finds a great story of psychology in the news. It's our first segment that we call
Be Human.
There is new research that suggests giving parents therapy can be just as helpful with anxious children as therapy for the kids themselves. In a new study in the Journal of the American Academy of Childhood and Adolescent Psychiatry, researchers found that offering treatment to parents of kids with anxiety disorders is just as helpful even if the kids don't get treatment themselves. In the study, they randomly assigned children diagnosed with anxiety disorders to receive cognitive behavioral therapy and other kids not to have therapy, but for their parents to participate in something called Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions, or SPACE. In SPACE, the parents learned to reduce their accommodations while still supporting and acknowledging the difficulties their children were facing. And after 12 weeks, the kids who received therapy themselves had just as much benefit as those who got no treatment, but whose parents did. Emma Kate, as someone who sees anxious kids and anxious parents, what do you make of this new study?
I think it's fascinating, first of all, and intuitively it makes sense. So many of the families that I work with, parents are extremely anxious. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And we have parents that are truly wanting the best for their kids, but I love that they call it space because a lot of times the kids just want space for mom and dad. And so we find parents are exacerbating a lot of kids' potential anxiety, and they're also modeling anxious behaviors. So if we're able to potentially help benefit the child by addressing parent, we should do that. And oftentimes anyway, I tend to need to work with parents one-on-one to help the child in the first place.
This is something we've known for a long time, that if you help the parent, you can help the kid. And ADHD kids in particular, and oppositional defiant kids, the best bang for your buck in treatment is to involve the parents in some kind of parent coaching, parent training, that kind of thing. That's the single best thing therapeutically that you can do for ADHD kids. So it makes sense that, involving them with anxiety-related difficulties is going to have the same kind of payoff for it.
You see
makes good sense.
You see with parents that are anxious, they take it so personally. I think you should get some help, and they're already very insecure, and they feel so defensive, like I'm to blame. Like they'll just go so far to the extremes versus, a household. I mean, the research is there. A household where the kids report that their parents are stressed or anxious, they have higher rates of anxiety themselves. And when you see the dynamic duo of an anxious parent and an anxious child, man, things can escalate and get out of hand really quickly.
Yeah, I would love to see this study replicated because it could potentially switch up treatment approaches where instead of having an initial appointment with the family to get background information, you could maybe work more directly with parents at first and then see how the child progresses and then decide to bring them in if things aren't working out. So I do think there's a lot of cool implications for this.
I do too. And I also will say there are specific things about anxiety that we're not talking about whether parents are to blame or not to blame, but really about things that sometimes are very counterintuitive, that if parents understand the way to approach their kid, it makes a big difference. One example is that families that reassure their anxious kids see far less progress with the kid. So we have a kid that they're anxious about something, about germs, contamination, going to hell, something like that. And they go to the parents, and the parents get in this loop of, no, honey, you're fine. Those germs are normal. You're not going to be sick. It creates this loop where the kid comes back over and over and over again to get reassured, and they actually get stuck and they don't progress. So just parents knowing that kind of thing helps move the thing forward. So I think absolutely, definitely a good move.
And that's why I never reassure Frank, because
Right.
it's going to make it worse. And how much worse could it get? I do not want to find out. But I love your example, Dave. You said, kids that are afraid of germs or going to hell. And you're like, don't worry about the germs, but you didn't bring up, you're not going to hell.
Who am I to know the mind of God?
Do you know something about that kid that I don't know?
How can you be sure? All right. Well, if you have questions or comments, or if you just have thoughts about this, tell us what you think. We'd love to hear from you. You can let us know by tweeting at us at shrink_tank, or you can write us feedback@shrinktank.com. And speaking of that, we've gotten a ton of comments already on our Michael Jackson podcast that we recorded. And if you go to YouTube, now we've got a ton of subscribers, more coming in every day, and a lot of comments. And because of the nature of the content that we talked about with Michael Jackson Finding Neverland, obviously we've got some definite thumbs up and definite thumbs down, which is great. We want that. So if you want to see us in action, including the lovely new equipment that that Sean has purchased for us, yes, lovely. And if you want to just check out our YouTube channel, we'd love for you to subscribe there. We'd love to get emails from you or tweet us on Twitter. We'd love to engage with you about all that stuff. So it's feedback@shrinktank.com or Twitter @shrink _tank.
No, and Dave, you're wrong. All of the comments have been unanimously positive. Like, they love us on the YouTube. They love us. Like, everything we say is just golden. Like, YouTube is the place where positivity reigns. That's awesome.
YouTube and Twitter,
oh yeah,
for that matter.
I mean, and don't get me started on Reddit, like the Shangri-La of positivity.
Oh boy.
So we love it. All right, well, let's move on to our trending topic, and it's the college admissions scam. And it's a hot one. We're going to talk about that and the psychology of privilege. So let's just back up. Unless you've been living in a cave, you've heard about this, and it was back last week. U.S. federal prosecutors. Now, remember, these are federal charges. The federales came around for this. This isn't like local or state charges. This is like the big boys came after them. So they charged dozens of people, pushing around 50 people, I think, in a $25 million scheme that helped wealthy and privileged families buy their children's way into elite schools that included Yale, Georgetown, Stanford, and others. And there were lots of CEOs involved. There were lots of high-powered business folk and 2 Hollywood actresses that were well-known. Lori Loughlin, who was Aunt Becky on Full House. Felicity Huffman, who was Oscar-nominated, who also is William H. Macy's wife. They're among those being charged. So let's just do a quick round robin of initial reaction, initial thoughts to the scandal, and we'll start with Emma Kate.
So this sounds kind of horrible, but I honestly wasn't surprised. I really wasn't. I think about people who make large donations to universities to build a building, and then their kid gets in, and whoa, shocker, when you donate $2+ million. So I genuinely wasn't surprised. I was upset, obviously. And I feel badly for a lot of people who have worked very, very hard to potentially get into an elite school, and their opportunity was passed over for someone else. So it's just unfortunate, but I think people are tired of the bowl and they want things to change. And I feel like we are in a time period right now where everybody's laundry is being aired out, and I think that's good. I think it's good that we're starting to make some changes, and I think we have a lot of changes to make, though, from a societal perspective.
And let's be clear, because most people know this, but for those of you who haven't been following the scandal very well, this isn't just them paying money for, like a building or an endowment on a university campus. This is illegal stuff. This is to the level of, we're going to bribe a test proctor for an ACT or SAT to give the right answers or to erase the answers and replace them, or we're going to bribe a sports coach to say that this is a heavily recruited athlete when they didn't even play that sport.
That was hilarious.
Like water polo, where they've never been in the water, or golf, or whatever it would be, so that they're in a different bucket in terms of admissions. So it's stuff that involves bribery, involves flat out cheating, lying. I mean, it is over the top stuff. So it is what you said times 3. It's kind of the next level of crazy for that. Jonathan, your initial reactions to this?
Well, it is surprising and not surprising. I think it's not surprising because we're talking about very powerful and affluent people that are used to getting their way, and they have the means oftentimes to find ways to accomplish whatever goal that they have. It's surprising because Emma Kate and you, Dave, we've mentioned all the ways that are legal, if not particularly like maybe immoral or ethically questionable, but there are many legal ways that you can use money to really enhance your child's likelihood of getting into a college or university of their choice. So the fact that so many people decided to go the illegal route, and we're talking about fraud and conspiracy and all, versus like just donate more, make a bigger building, in your name, sponsor 2 restrooms, I mean, they needed those assurance and guarantees. And the other thing that was really shocking to me was the amount of coaches for sports, specifically women's sports, which I don't know what to make of that, but that stood out to me. I mean, there's all this conversation going on, at least for me as a college sports fan, always talking about amateur status and not paying student athletes, especially in the profitable sports of basketball and football and stuff. But here you had all of these women's sports coaches taking these bribes to open up these scholarships for people that weren't expected to play that sport. And I'm just like, you mean I could have gotten a scholarship as a water boy? Like, I never knew about that. I would have totally been pushing for that.
That would be amazing. And I think one comment, and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, but my understanding is that the whole whistleblowing situation for this entire scandal came from somebody being charged for a different crime and then them deciding, oh, you know what, let me just give this information to help with that issue. And then it just
they rolled over.
Yep.
Right. So I find that fascinating in and of itself, because otherwise, if that person had been caught for whatever unethical or immoral thing they were doing, we may not have had this happen yet.
If they didn't get caught, my daughter would be a water girl scholarship for Yale's junior varsity badminton intramural.
The Quidditch team.
Yeah. I mean, come on.
So let's talk big picture first, and then move down into the specific level of families and parenting. But Emma Kate, you said this at the beginning of your opening, that there's a lot going on right now culturally where things that were hidden are getting exposed, things that where people were up to shady things or where they were victimizing other people that previously no one would either pay attention to, or if they were the victims didn't have a voice or whatever it was. But now it's like there's this light being shined on all kinds of dirty secrets and dirt in our culture. Why now? Why do you think, sociologically, but psychologically also, like what's going on where this is now, it's just ripe for this stuff to come out?
So that's a great question. I feel like everybody, again, is just tired of the bull, that everybody is really fed up with how there is this long lineage of inequality within our education system, within the workforce, within people being held accountable for their actions, with the judicial system, with, as you know, from our Michael Jackson episode to R. Kelly to the Catholic priest. I mean, there's just so much stuff that's coming out right now that I can't help but feel there is this movement where, and I guess this is the psych angle to an extent, it's become acceptable for us to openly share about our wounds and to talk through issues that in the past we wouldn't want to hear anything about. So now people are more willing to listen, and I think that truthfully is kind of the driving factor in terms of people understand that others are going to listen now.
But why now?
Again, I think everybody is just tired of all of the bull. So with the political stuff that's been going on since Trump got into office, a lot of people are fed up with the polarized spectrum there. People feel like they're not being heard, or they're being marginalized in other ways. And so the only thing that I can think of for now is we really want things to change. We want to see America progress and be great, and it can't stay stagnant in its current state.
Jonathan?
Well, I think Obama's 8 years followed by Trump, I think a lot of people were very much shocked by the implications of that. I think a lot of people came to this realization that there wasn't as much progress or advancing progress as they hoped or they had been led to believe, that there is a sizable demographic of the American population that has very differing views, have very differing ideas of what progress or sanctity of America is. I think social media has created a platform for people. We've talked about call-out culture. I think, in that episode, I was a little bit maybe more of a dissenting perspective. Like, I think that there's a lot of value to that, but I think we're in this age of moral outrage where there is, I think we're just very polarized and divisive, and I think both sides are very guilty of circling their wagons and having an echo chamber. But even this, you start to see maybe in both parties, because things seem to be moving in more extreme kind of polls, that you're starting to see infighting and almost like both polarizing parties trying to clean house a little bit. Like, you think of Harvey Weinstein, you think of Hollywood, you tend to think of the liberal media, liberal people, but here you have powerful people that generally are considered very progressive and innovative, liberal, and you're recognizing, they're just as capable of abusing power and opportunity and privilege at the expense of other people. So I think there's a lot going on here. This just is sort of like the perfect storm for us to start to talk about it.
On this podcast, we have harshed a lot on Donald Trump, and I think we do that unapologetically, and I'm sure that is polarizing as well. By the way, for those of you who are mad about that kind of thing, you'll be pleased to hear that next week on the podcast, we're going to talk about the impact of liberal media bias. So just so you know, and sometimes I think it's about what Trump represents, and sometimes I think it's about what Trump is himself. In this case, I think a lot of this, to be honest, comes from Trump himself. And here's what I mean. I think first, people are who are more on the left are strongly opposed not only to Trump, but sort of what he represents as somebody that can make these comments, do these things, and still is in a position of power. On the other side, people that are more pro-Trump, he has this bully pulpit that he uses to diminish our trust in institutions, whether that is the FBI, intelligence, the media, etc. And so we're living in a culture right now where our ability to trust institutions is trashed. Like it is completely trashed. We don't trust law enforcement on either side. We don't trust, the intelligence gathering. We don't trust the media. We don't trust any. And so it is ripe for a culture of anything that's sort of proposed that is saying, look, these institutions or these people in positions of power and privilege are doing shady things and not to be trusted. I think on both sides of the spectrum, we're sort of ready for to believe that. It's sort of, it just fits right now. It's sort of culturally a great fit. So let me take it down to this level of not just the institutional level, but to the parenting level. We've talked on this podcast, and we've certainly written and spoken a lot about how anxious parents are now and how they helicopter to the point of micromanaging every aspect of their kids and how that's bad and it thwarts development, and how they micromanage even college admissions processes by helping get people to coach and to write essays and all this kind of stuff. Is what we're seeing with this just the logical next level extension of that, or is it something else? Is this just part of, like, we're living in a culture of parental anxiety where I have to do everything I can to get my kid an advantage, even if I'm already have given them every advantage in the world? Is this more of the same, or is it qualitatively different? Is there something different about this? Emma Kate?
So I do think this parent anxiety piece is a critical factor. We know for a fact that our parents are doing too much of the lifting for our kids right now, and that's really hindering their ability to build their resiliency muscle, to develop grit. And it's also creating this accountability piece with, we are making entitled kids. If you have a child where they never experience a failure or they never experience a setback, they're not going to know how hard it is for other people. And, relatedly, a lot of this elite school stuff, it's an important factor within our culture too, because parents who are anxious are sometimes trying to live vicariously through their children. They are measuring their success based on their child's success, and that's not okay. And I also feel that parents who do struggle with anxiety, it's almost like once they get whatever goal they're trying to achieve, then they can use that as bragging rights. Well, my child got into so-and-so. And I have to clarify that there is absolutely nothing wrong with wanting the best for your child. At the same time, though, a lot of anxious parents engage in safety behaviors where essentially they try to take care of an issue when, just as an example, there are plenty of parents, a child would forget a homework assignment or a project, and parent would be willing to just drop everything and go deliver that to the school, no matter how large of an inconvenience that actually is. That's actually not helpful for your child, because the day that you do that, they're not going to remember, I didn't remember to bring this project, and I'll never do that again. Instead, that is just completely wiped out, and then they may just start depending on you to bring all the things that they forget. So,
Dave, I think we all share this perspective, but you and I both have written for psychbites.com, one of our media websites, basically about resiliency and let kids fail or stop doing things that they can do for themselves. And we have a colleague here in the Charlotte office, and every now and then this colleague will come up to me and say a situation that came up with their kid and talk, and then they'll say, and I didn't do this. I didn't drop everything. And then they'll look me in the eye and say, tell me I'm a good parent. Like they need that reassurance. And I'm like,
Right.
you're actually smarter than me. Like there's no question. And yet, this basic common sense, we talk ourselves out of that. It may be the wrong thing. And I do think that there is an element of just anxious parenting, but there's something different about this as well. There's an added element of privilege, and part of it is you look and what the reports or the investigation found out was that most of the kids didn't know all of this was happening. And so there's an element of parents actually usurping the process, not just over-accommodating, but taking complete control of this to the point where these kids, it's not so much that their parents are shielding them from disappointment. Their parents are applying to colleges for them. And these kids now are experiencing an extreme amount of embarrassment and public scrutiny. I feel, I mean, some of them have had a platform of just privilege and entitlement and kind of making a brand for themselves. But a lot of them, it's hard to feel bad when parents' choices really negatively impact the lives of kids, because I tend to be pretty neutral about social media. I think there's a lot of good that comes out of it, upside. I think there's some drawbacks, and there are certain populations that are more vulnerable for some negative. But I expect a kid to be insecure and need reassurance and feedback from social media. To me, it drives me batty the amount of adults and parents that need that reassurance and that affirmation that they're a good parent, and it's usually at the expense of like how successful my kid is, and then they're putting it up online. So a lot of these parents, it was just as much about them, about their image as parents, as it was about wanting what's best for their kids.
And I'll add that I have a lot of compassion for parents. I am not a parent yet. I'd like to be one day, but my concern is that we have a lot of parents that are not taking into account the hopes and dreams of their children and not thinking about the match of a school or a university for their child. So yes, we've been talking about parent anxiety, but just in general, and I know we've talked about this before, but we have an absolute epidemic in terms of anxiety in general within our population right now. And I think about how much is expected of children in this day and age compared to my generation, compared to y'all's generations, where
we're from different generations?
What? I know, that's weird. But I mean, seriously, kids are so overscheduled to the point where most adults wouldn't be able to cope with what kids nowadays are having to manage and balance. And so, we've got parents who are putting a lot of pressure on our children and our teens. And then we've also got this aspect too with parent anxiety where we want them to be successful. So if you have a brilliant artist as a child, you're going to say, oh, well, that's nice, but I really don't want you to pursue that because you're not going to be able to make a career off of that and make money and have sustainable future. So then they may just take an opportunity to alter an application without kids' knowledge, which fundamentally is so wrong on so many different levels. But I don't know. So we just need to be focusing more on our kids and what they need as opposed to what parents' expectations or wants are for their children.
So I want to dig a little bit deeper in this, and not just the parental anxiety part, but part of what Jonathan was talking about and a little bit about what you're talking about. And that is, how do we get in the head of this kind of parent? You're already a CEO. Your net worth is in the millions. You're already a famous person who is wealthy. How do you get, because we've been talking, not just us, but culturally we've been talking about it's bad to helicopter for your kids. It's bad to kind of micromanage. We have to let kids fail. We have to let the kids make decisions that are good and bad. All that's out there. How does somebody, and I hate to pile on like Lori Loughlin or Felicity Huffman. I know there's a pile on with them, but for them, like, what's the mindset? What's the psychology of getting to that place where you're willing to do something illegal? And let's just make the point. This wasn't like shady or unethical. My understanding is the reason why Felicity Huffman was charged and William Macy wasn't is because he was in on conversation, but he basically he wasn't championing this way of doing it. He wasn't really pushing it. Whereas she was pushing this, both of them were doing things that by any standard were morally, legally wrong. How do you get to that place?
So I genuinely feel like a lot of it stems from image and perception of others and how they view themselves, and then also competition. I think a lot of these families who are in these positions of power like to flex that. They like to show, oh, I have X, Y, and Z, all these wonderful things, and my kids got into these really exclusive, challenging schools, and it's bragging. So again, it's just more fuel to feed competition.
Dave, when you talk about the erosion of trust in institutions, part of the age of anxiety is that we are placing a high premium on performance and achievement. And I spend a lot of time in my individual therapy sessions, but in my groups a lot. And I'll be honest, most parents and a lot of the kids don't see the value of it. But I spend a lot of time on moral and character development. I mean, it's really about developing morality, developing values and principles, and learning how to align your decisions with those values versus emotional reasoning, where we allow our feelings or our fears to dictate the types of decisions that we make. We're talking about very smart people here, very smart people involved. All these kids would have gotten into college. Let's be honest. It's not as though they would not have access to higher education. But right. You have very smart people making very dumb decisions. And at the root of it is that they bypassed their critical thinking and intelligence, and they were able to justify in their own head to follow their fears or worries or even entitlement, which would be their narcissism or hubris or something of that nature, to where they did something dramatically illegal and they thought that they would get away with it, probably because they've bent the rules or our society bends the rules for them so much to where it's not the most outrageous thought that they could do something illegal and not be held accountable for it.
I just think of Lori Loughlin, and I think her daughter had expressed a lack of interest in school, and that was out there. She also was a social media influencer, had 1.5 million followers on Instagram. Like, this is a kid, A, doesn't have a lot of interest in school from what she's saying, and B, has really the kind of future career that she wants to have. If she wants to, make money, if she wants to be famous, she's got all that. So why do this? That's where I get hung up, is like, how do you get to a place of like, okay, given that, all right, that's she's been handed a nice situation, and why do we have to do these things that are flat out wrong and illegal to get her into USC?
And it's so complicated for her. It's not complicated necessarily, but there's so many factors. Like, Lori Loughlin has gone on record in the past talking about how she didn't go to college. I think that's the case. And so she didn't want her daughters she wanted a better life for her kids. And in her mind, and maybe culturally, that's the message of college is a route for responsible, intelligent people to have that. And so she also talked about having that as a backup plan, which would make a lot of sense, but she could go to any college. That's there. I really think this image, this brand of Lori Loughlin, or celebrity, or her very successful husband in terms of like a fashion company or a clothing, like it was all about the imaging and branding. You need to be in Southern California. You need to go to a prestigious school because that fits in line with our overall family brand.
Right. And I don't claim to know their family culture or the messages or all that, but you've got to think it can't just be parental anxiety, right? For these families, their kids are going to be fine. And in that particular instance, not only is the kid fine, but is expressing not a lot of interest in school, and also has a social media following in 1 million plus, where they've been signed and have have deals with
Sephora,
other brands. Right. It's not it can't be an anxiety thing. It's got to be a we are going to use whatever privilege and whatever position we have to get what we want. It's got to be an entitlement thing.
Yeah, and I think it does kind of go back to what Jonathan was speaking to, this idea of we're focusing so much on achievement and performance as opposed to the actual characteristics of one's personality, their values, and we could all probably speculate on things that are valued by certain families over other families, but I guess I always just kind of get drawn back to this idea of where we put our time and energy is really important in terms of guiding our future. And so if she grew up in a household where your image is really important, having material things is really important, making money is really important, then you're going to try to take steps towards that, because if that's what mom and dad value, then you need to be accepted by mom and dad. So you're going to work towards that. So I guess, I don't know. I think there's going to have to be a shift in terms of parents needing to have conversations with their kids about what matters to them, and just having an honest, open discussion about what's important.
Yeah. And
Jonathan, any last thoughts?
well, it's going to be interesting to see, does this trickle down to the everyday American family, to where, you can say, oh, there's an element of affluence and entitlement, but there is an aspect of really parents superseding kids' control in their life and decision making at this real pivotal juncture in their life. And can the average American reflect on how they may, in some ways fall victim to that type of thinking, even if they don't come from a position of privilege, to really empower your kids. Like, the letting your kids fail is, I believe in you. I believe that you have the capability to learn from this. I believe you have the capability to grow and avoid that same setback or failure, to really protect and shield them. Is basically, I don't believe in you. You can't do it. The only way you're going to have a happy life is if I control and direct your life, which is exhausting, and it doesn't work.
Yep.
Right.
And
it sets the kid up for failure.
Yeah.
Yep, bingo. And I think relatedly to this privilege piece, what I think is going to happen is eventually the government is going to probably step in some capacity, solely from an economic perspective, because I think everyone's aware of this, obviously, but it's more than just the individual that's being harmed by the cost of going to a university. In terms of being able to plan for retirement, buying a home, it's the economy as a whole that's impacted. So there's going to be a whole generation of individuals that are not going to be able to buy into the housing market, who are going to be continuing to make really low wages because of stiff competition, where, you know, in the past, going to college was really an amazing thing. And now it's almost as though, okay, well, everybody has to go to college. And the good news is there's a college for everyone. But I think we're neglecting this piece about a shift that has to happen with, it's okay to go to a trade school. It's okay, because there are people, so plumbers, for example, can make $80,000. That's a lot more than I make. And they didn't have to go to 8+ years of school to get that level of pay. And there's a lot of respectable jobs that people can do without having to necessarily go to school. So we're going to have to address, again, from the systems level, the idea of privilege, the cost of school, all sorts of things.
Well, that is a good conversation. We'd love to pick it up another time, but we want to hear what you think, and you can let us know by tweeting at us at @shrink_tank or writing us at feedback@shrinktank.com. Also, if you'll check out our YouTube channel and subscribe, the video of the podcast drops on Monday, and you can make comments on that, and we'd love to hear from you there. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Shrink Tank Podcast. If you like this episode, we hope that you'll give us a good rating on iTunes and tell your friends about us and subscribe. For more content, and we would love for you to explore the intersection of psychology and pop culture through shrinktank.com. We have articles, videos, all kinds of cool things. And you can also find links to our recommendations and our doctor's orders products. You can follow us on Twitter at @shrink_tank and like us on Facebook. And for questions or comments, again, drop us a note. Our email is feedback@shrinktank.com. Our producer and theme music composer is Sean Beck. Our associate producer and social media guru is Mariel Butler. For Emma Kate Wright, Jonathan Hederley, and Charlotte, I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. Hey, please tell all your friends about us and make it a great week.
Shrink Tank.